What if everything you knew about your family was a lie? Imagine waking up one day and discovering that the person you love most isn't who you thought they were. That a simple birthmark could unravel a forgotten past, a missing mother, and a battle for the very meaning of family. Tonight, we bring you The Forgotten Bond, a story of love, loss, and shocking revelations that will change everything. Thought balloon. Before we dive in, let me ask you this. If you were raised by someone who gave you everything, but your real family returned, who would you choose? What if the person who saved you was the same one keeping you from the truth? Stay with us as we uncover a mystery buried in time, a love lost to memory, and a decision that will shake the very foundation of one boy's life. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do in this situation? Let me know in the comments. Now let's get into the story. The city buzzed with life as people hurried down the sidewalks, their eyes fixed on their phones or focused straight ahead. Amid the rushing crowd, an 8-year-old boy sat on the pavement, carefully arranging marbles and small trinkets on a worn blue cloth. 50 cents each, Noah called out with a bright smile, waving a polished stone at a passing businessman. They sparkle in the sunlight. The man barely glanced at him before walking away. Noah sighed but didn't let the rejection dampen his spirits. From across the street, a woman sat on a weathered wooden bench, watching him. Her gray-streaked brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she clutched a small golden locket in her hand. Margaret Lawson had spent years wandering these streets, but today, something about the boy caught her attention. There was a warmth to him, an eagerness to be seen. She watched as he adjusted his display, his small hands carefully lining up each item. The sight of him stirred something in her, something she couldn't quite grasp. As the sun began to dip below the skyline, Margaret felt a strange pull toward the boy, as if she had known him in another life. Noah's stomach growled as he counted the few coins he had earned. Not enough to impress Mr. Hastings, he thought. Just then, his eyes landed on the elderly woman still sitting on the bench. She seemed lost in thought, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the surface of the locket. Without hesitation, Noah grabbed a wrapped granola bar from his backpack and walked over. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "You look like you could use a snack." Margaret blinked, startled by his kindness. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't take that from you." "You can," Noah insisted. "I have more." She hesitated, then took the bar with a grateful smile. "You're very kind. What's your name?" "Noah." Margaret repeated the name under her breath, as if testing how it felt. "That's a lovely name." Something flickered in her mind, like a memory just out of reach. A sudden gust of wind rustled through the trees, sending a chill down Noah's spine. He looked up to see dark clouds gathering overhead. "Oh," he muttered. Within minutes, raindrops began to fall, light at first, then harder. People around them hurried for shelter, opening umbrellas or running into nearby stores. Margaret clutched her thin cardigan around her frail body. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Noah asked, concern creeping into his voice. Margaret hesitated. "I'll find a place." The rain intensified, drenching them both. Noah knew there was plenty of space at the Hastings estate. He bit his lip, debating. He wasn't supposed to bring strangers home, but she wasn't a stranger, was she? "Come with me," he said, tugging at her hand. "You'll get sick out here." Margaret hesitated, but something about Noah's urgency made her trust him. She nodded, and together, they ran through the rain. The iron gates of the Hastings estate loomed before them. Noah quickly punched in the security code, his fingers trembling from the cold rain. The gates groaned open, and they hurried up the long driveway. Margaret gasped when they reached the grand entrance. The house was massive, tall marble columns, a carved oak door, and gleaming windows. It was a home built for royalty, not for someone like her. "Noah, I can't go in there," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Noah insisted, opening the door. "Come on." The moment they stepped inside, warm golden light flooded over them. But the comfort was short-lived. "Noah." The voice was low, controlled, but carried a weight that stopped Noah in his tracks. Elliot Hastings stood at the top of the grand staircase, arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes narrowing at the sight before him. His presence filled the vast foyer, making the luxurious space feel suffocating. Noah gulped. "Mr. Hastings, I." Elliot's gaze snapped to Margaret, taking in her soaked clothing and weathered appearance. His expression darkened. "What is this? His voice was clipped, precise. Who is this woman? Margaret took a cautious step back. She had nowhere to go. Noah interrupted. And it's storming. I thought. You thought. Elliot's voice was cold. Noah, we have discussed this. You do not bring strangers into our home. Margaret's shoulders slumped. I understand. I'll leave. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the tension in the room. Noah clenched his fists. But she's nice, he argued. She's not dangerous. Elliot exhaled slowly, trying to suppress his frustration. That's not the point. Margaret turned to leave, but something made her stop. Her eyes flicked to a portrait hanging above the fireplace. A woman holding a baby, her features blurred by the dim light. A wave of dizziness hit her. The locket in her hand suddenly felt heavy. Margaret's breathing grew unsteady. Her fingers traced the edges of the locket, her mind reeling. Noah watched as her face paled. Are you okay? She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze dropped to Noah's wrist, where his sleeve had pulled back slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. A crescent-shaped birthmark. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. The world around her spun. Memories, hazy and fragmented, surged forward. Whispers of a hospital room, a lullaby, a baby's tiny fingers gripping hers. Her grandson, Noah. Before she could say a word, darkness closed in. Margaret crumpled to the floor. Margaret, Noah cried, dropping to his knees beside her. Elliot moved quickly, his earlier anger forgotten. Call an ambulance, he ordered the butler. But Noah barely heard him. He clutched Margaret's hand, his own heart pounding. Why did it feel like he'd just lost something he never knew he had? The night was thick with the lingering weight of the storm, raindrops still streaking down the grand windows of the Hastings estate. The house was silent, but Noah couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment Margaret had collapsed, the way her face had drained of color, the shock in her eyes when she saw his birthmark. He threw off the heavy covers and padded softly down the hallway, his socked feet barely making a sound against the polished wooden floor. He hesitated outside the guest room, his fingers brushing against the cool brass handle before he finally pushed the door open. Margaret lay still, the soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminating the lines of worry etched into her face even in sleep. Noah stepped closer, guilt twisting in his chest. Miss Margaret, he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered, her breathing uneven. Then, suddenly, she gasped, eyes snapping open. She sat up with a start, her hands gripping the sheets as if anchoring herself to reality. Noah froze. Her gaze darted toward him, her expression a mix of confusion and desperation. Noah, she murmured, her voice hoarse. His breath caught. How do you know my name? Margaret frowned, rubbing her temples. I don't know. She looked at him, really looked at him, her eyes flickering with an emotion Noah couldn't name. But I feel like I've known you my whole life. A shiver ran down his spine. He stepped forward hesitantly, curling his fingers around the bedpost. Do you remember why you fainted? Margaret exhaled shakily. I saw something. Your birthmark. Her voice was barely above a whisper, her fingers twitching toward the golden locket she always clutched. And then, it was like something inside me cracked open. Like I was supposed to remember something, but it slipped away again before I could catch it. Noah's fingers instinctively brushed over the crescent-shaped mark on his wrist. He wanted to ask more, to push her for answers, but she looked so lost, as if she was grasping at the edges of a puzzle missing its most important pieces. You should rest, he finally said, forcing a smile to hide his unease. Margaret's lips trembled, but she nodded. As he turned to leave, she whispered, Thank you for finding me. Noah paused in the doorway, heart pounding, but he didn't turn back. Across the mansion, Elliot sat in the dim glow of his study lamp, fingers pressing against his temples as he listened to the steady ringing of his phone. Finally, a voice crackled through the speaker. Richard Carter speaking. Elliot exhaled sharply. I need you to look into someone for me. The private investigator sighed. Name? Margaret Lawson. Late 50s, gray-streaked hair, homeless, or at least pretending to be. Elliot's voice was clipped, cold. She's in my house right now, and I want to know exactly who she is. There was a pause. Then Carter chuckled dryly. What? You think she's some long-lost duchess? I don't trust coincidences, Elliot muttered, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. She knew Noah's name. She reacted to him like she'd seen a ghost. All right, I'll run a background check, Carter said. Anything specific I should look for? Find out if she has a record. Any connections to Noah's past? And Elliot hesitated, his fingers clenching into a fist. Look into missing persons cases. Just in case. His stomach twisted at his own words. Because deep down, Elliot feared that Margaret wasn't just a stray drifter. He feared she was something far worse, someone who could take Noah away from him. The next morning, the mansion's dining room was unusually quiet. Margaret sat at the long oak table, her posture stiff as she stirred her tea absent-mindedly. Noah sat across from her, trying to act normal, but his mind buzzed with questions. Elliot sat at the head of the table, watching them both over the top of his newspaper. Then, Margaret did something unexpected. She started humming. A soft, slow tune, carrying a haunting familiarity. Noah's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He knew that song. Somewhere, somehow he knew it. His head snapped up. Where did you hear that? Margaret's fingers tightened around her cup. I don't know, she admitted, looking puzzled. It just came to me. Noah's stomach twisted. Because the last time he heard that song, really heard it, was in a dream. A dream of warm arms rocking him, a soft voice whispering words he couldn't remember. Elliot lowered his newspaper slowly. His sharp blue eyes flickered between them, his jaw tightening. Noah, finish your breakfast, he ordered. Noah opened his mouth to protest, but something in Elliot's icy gaze stopped him. Margaret didn't miss it either. For the first time, she realized Elliot wasn't just a guardian. He was a man terrified of losing something. And suddenly, she wondered if Noah had been lost before. Later that afternoon, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Margaret's reaction to his birthmark, the lullaby, the strange way Elliot was acting. So, he did what any curious child would do. He went searching for answers. Slipping away from the main hallway, he climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic. The air grew musty as he reached the top, the door creaking as he pushed it open. The space was dimly lit, filled with dust-covered trunks and old furniture draped in sheets. Noah's fingers brushed against a stack of old baby blankets. His heart pounded. Then something caught his eye, an embroidered emblem on one of the blankets. A tiny blue star stitched into the corner. His fingers trembled as he lifted it, the fabric soft but worn. A gasp sounded behind him. Noah spun around to see Margaret standing in the doorway, her hands shaking as she stared at the blanket. I know that, she whispered. Noah's throat went dry. You do? Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with something that looked like recognition and fear all at once. And then, it happened. A fragmented memory slammed into her mind. A hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, a tiny baby in her arms, wrapped in a blanket just like this one. Her vision swam, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured, I had a grandson. That evening, Margaret sat across from Elliot in his study. The tension in the air was thick, a silent battle waged between two forces with one thing in common, Noah. I remember something, Margaret said, clutching her locket. Not everything, but enough to know I was looking for someone. Someone I lost. Elliot's jaw clenched. This doesn't prove anything. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Then why are you so afraid? Elliot's breath hitched, but before he could respond, his phone rang. He answered gruffly. On the other end, Richard Carter's voice came through. Elliot, we found something. The blood drained from Elliot's face. Margaret Lawson, Carter continued. She was reported missing after a car accident 8 years ago. And just like that, everything changed. Elliot sat in his dimly lit study, fingers steepled, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Across from him, Richard Carter set a manila folder on the desk and exhaled slowly. You're not going to like what I found, Carter said, tapping the file. Elliot swallowed hard. Tell me. Carter flipped the folder open, revealing a hospital record from 8 years ago. Margaret Lawson was admitted to St. Helena Hospital after a car accident. Severe head trauma. Memory loss. He paused, then looked Elliot straight in the eye. She had a daughter, Amelia Lawson. Elliot's grip on the armrest tightened. Amelia was declared dead in the same accident, Carter continued. But here's where it gets strange. There was an infant involved, a baby boy. Officially, the hospital reported that the child was never found. Elliot's blood ran cold. The timeline fits, Elliot, Carter pressed. Noah would have been that baby. Elliot shook his head. No, I adopted Noah legally. Carter sighed, sliding another document forward. Private adoptions aren't always what they seem. If the paperwork was falsified, it's possible someone covered up what really happened to Amelia's child. A deep ache formed in Elliot's chest. The thought that Noah, his Noah, could have been taken from his real family without his mother even knowing made his hands shake. "Find out what really happened," Elliot said, his voice hoarse. "I want the full truth." Elliot barely touched his morning coffee, his thoughts a storm of doubt and fear. Could he really lose Noah? He had raised the boy for 8 years, given him everything. But no amount of money or discipline could erase the truth. If Margaret and Amelia were truly Noah's family, then Elliot's role in his life was no longer so clear. Across the dining room, Margaret sat quietly, stirring her tea. She didn't meet his eyes. Noah, oblivious to the tension, chattered about his science project. "I want to use different kinds of light to see which helps plants grow faster." Margaret said she'd help me find some samples today. Elliot's stomach twisted. Margaret. She was becoming important to Noah. The boy gravitated toward her, as if drawn by some unseen force. And Elliot feared that, once Amelia returned, he would be the odd one out. Would Noah still need him? Would he still love him? Shaking off the thought, Elliot cleared his throat. "I'll have James drive you both to get what you need," he said stiffly. Margaret blinked in surprise. "That's kind of you, Elliot." He didn't respond, because deep down, he wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for Noah, for the boy who had become his entire world, and for the terrifying possibility that he might not be enough. Later that afternoon, Noah and Margaret stood outside St. Helena Rehabilitation Center, the facility towering over them. Margaret clutched her locket, a deep anxiety swirling inside her. "I don't know why I feel like I've been here before," she murmured. Noah nudged her hand. "Maybe it's because we're supposed to find something." With a deep breath, Margaret stepped inside. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils as they approached the reception desk. A young nurse looked up from her paperwork, offering a polite smile. "How can I help you?" Margaret hesitated. "I think I may have been a patient here years ago. My name is Margaret Lawson." The nurse frowned, typing into the computer. "One moment." Noah, restless, wandered to a bulletin board filled with patient notices and missing persons reports. A newspaper clipping caught his eye, an old article about a car accident from 8 years ago. His heart pounded as he read the names. Margaret Lawson, Amelia Lawson, unidentified infant. He gasped. "Margaret, look." Margaret hurried over, her fingers trembling as she read the faded text. And then, her knees nearly buckled, because beneath the article was a hospital transfer slip. Patient, Amelia Lawson. Status, transferred under new identity due to memory loss. Margaret stared at it, realization crashing over her. "My daughter," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. She wasn't dead. She was here. The nurse returned just as Margaret steadied herself. "Ma'am, we do have a record of your admission," she said. "But we also have something else. Would you like to meet a patient named Amelia Lawson?" Margaret finished breathlessly. The nurse's eyebrows raised, but she nodded. "Follow me." They were led through a quiet hallway lined with rooms. Margaret's heart thundered in her chest as the nurse opened a door. Inside, a frail woman sat by the window, her hazel eyes distant, her hands folded in her lap. Noah froze. She looked just like him. Margaret let out a strangled sob. "Amelia?" The woman turned slowly, her brows furrowing. She studied Margaret's face as if trying to place a half-remembered dream. "I know you," Amelia murmured, her voice weak. Margaret rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the chair. "It's me, sweetheart. It's your mother." Tears slipped down Amelia's cheeks as she reached out, her fingertips grazing Margaret's face. "Mom." Margaret let out a sob, clutching her daughter for the first time in 8 years. Noah, his heart hammering, stepped closer. He didn't fully understand what was happening. But then, Amelia's gaze landed on him. She gasped. Her eyes widened, flickering between him and Margaret. Who is he?" Margaret took Noah's hand and whispered, "Your son." Amelia's entire body went still. And then, her breath hitched. Because in that moment, a flood of memories crashed through the dam of her mind. Flashes of a baby's laugh, of lullabies sung in the dark, of a tiny birthmark beneath tiny fingers. And she remembered everything. Elliot burst through the hospital doors, his expression thunderous. He spotted them immediately. Margaret, Noah. and the woman he never thought he'd see alive. "Step away from him," Elliot demanded, his voice like steel. Margaret and Amelia both turned, their tear-streaked faces shocked by his arrival. Noah flinched at the tone in Elliot's voice. "Elliot, wait," Margaret began. Elliot's gaze hardened. "You had no right to take him here. He deserved to know the truth," Margaret shot back. Elliot's hands clenched into fists. "The truth? The truth is that I raised him. I was the one who was there when he cried, when he was sick, when he needed someone." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. "You don't get to just walk back in and take him away from me." Margaret straightened, her voice firm. "He is Amelia's son." Elliot's jaw locked. And Noah, caught in the middle, looked between them, his green eyes filled with confusion and pain. "I don't want to lose anyone," he whispered. Elliot's anger flickered. Margaret's resolve wavered. Amelia, holding back sobs, whispered the words that shattered them all. "I want my son back." And just like that, the battle for Noah had begun. Margaret sat stiffly in the office of Allison Whitaker, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for fighting impossible cases. The office smelled of leather-bound books and fresh coffee, but the weight in Margaret's chest made everything feel stifling. Allison skimmed through the hospital reports and investigators' findings before finally setting the papers down. "You have a strong case," Allison said, adjusting her glasses. "Noah is Amelia's biological son. With proof of your relation and Amelia's regained memory, the courts will consider your claim very seriously." Margaret's hands tightened around her locket. "So that means I can get him back?" Allison hesitated. "It's not that simple. Elliot Hastings has been Noah's legal guardian for 8 years. The court will take into account emotional bonds, financial stability, and the child's well-being. If Elliot fights for full custody, it won't be an easy win." Margaret swallowed hard. "I just want my grandson to know where he comes from," she murmured. Allison nodded. "Then we'll fight for him. But be prepared. Elliot Hastings won't let go without a battle." Elliot stood at his study window, watching the rain trail down the glass in silver streaks. His attorney, David Sterling, sat across from him, flipping through legal documents. "This lawsuit is a direct attack on your right as Noah's father," David said bluntly. "If we fight, we can prove that you've given Noah a stable, privileged life, something neither Margaret nor Amelia can match." Elliot's hands tightened into fists. "I won't let them take him." David leaned forward. "We need to build a case that shows you're Noah's best option. The judge will want to see proof that Margaret and Amelia can provide for him. Right now, they have no stable income, no home, no plan. That will work in our favor." Elliot hesitated. "You don't think I can win?" David sighed. "You can. But do you want to? This fight will put Noah in the middle. If we win, he'll be forced to say goodbye to his real mother." Elliot's chest tightened. He had spent years protecting Noah, providing for him, ensuring he never felt abandoned. But was he really doing this for Noah? Or was he doing it for himself? Noah sat curled up in the hidden garden, knees pulled to his chest. The sky above was streaked with fading hues of orange and purple, but his heart felt heavier than ever. Margaret sat beside him, offering a gentle smile. "You've been quiet." Noah shrugged. "Everyone's mad. Elliot barely talks to me now. And Amelia, she looks sad all the time." Margaret's heart ached. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're not mad at you, sweetheart. They just don't know how to fix this." Noah bit his lip. "Why can't we just be a family?" Margaret sighed, brushing his dark curls back. "Families come in different forms. Maybe we need to find a way where no one loses." Noah glanced at her, hope flickering in his green eyes. "Do you think Elliot and Amelia can figure it out?" Margaret wished she could promise that. Instead, she pulled him close. "We'll find a way, sweetheart. We won't let you go through this alone." Amelia stood outside Elliot's mansion, her hands trembling as she pressed the doorbell. The butler, James, opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Miss Lawson, I need to see Elliot," she said firmly. A few minutes later, Elliot appeared, his expression tightly controlled. "Amelia," she took a deep breath. "We need to talk. Not as rivals, not as legal opponents, just as people who love Noah." Elliot hesitated, then stepped aside, letting her in. The grand foyer felt intimidating, but Amelia kept her focus. "I don't want to fight you, Elliot," she said softly. "I just want my son to know me, to know where he comes from." Elliot's jaw tensed. "And you think ripping him away from me is the way to do that?" Amelia stepped closer, her hazel eyes earnest. "I don't want to take him away from you, but I need to be in his life." Elliot turned away, staring at the fireplace. "I've lost a child before, Amelia," he murmured. "I can't lose Noah, too." Amelia's breath hitched. She hadn't known. "Elliot," she whispered, "this doesn't have to be a war. We can find a way to share him." Elliot clenched his fists, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had the strength to keep fighting. The courtroom date was finalized. A letter arrived at both Amelia's and Elliot's homes. Custody hearing, 10 a.m., Friday. Margaret read it in silence, her hands shaking. Amelia exhaled, preparing herself for battle. And Elliot? He sat at his desk, staring at the letter, the weight of his choice crushing him. In just a few days, a judge would decide who Noah truly belonged to. And there was a terrifying possibility that the answer wasn't him. The towering walls of the family courthouse loomed over Elliot, Amelia, and Margaret as they entered. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with emotions too heavy to name. Noah clung to Margaret's hand, his green eyes darting nervously between the adults who claimed to love him. The courtroom was quiet as the judge took her seat, her sharp gaze scanning the room. "We are here today to determine the custody of Noah Hastings," she announced. "All parties will be heard before a ruling is made in the best interest of the child." Elliot's attorney, David Sterling, rose first. "Your Honor, my client has been Noah Hastings' sole guardian for the past 8 years, David began, his voice smooth and practiced. "He has provided the boy with a stable home, an excellent education, and every opportunity a child could need." Amelia's attorney, Allison Whitaker, stood next. "While that may be true, Your Honor, my client, Amelia Lawson, is Noah's biological mother. She was separated from her child not by choice, but by a tragic accident that left her with memory loss. Now that she has recovered, she is here to reclaim the child that was unjustly taken from her." Elliot gritted his teeth. The battle had begun. Amelia's hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. The entire courtroom waited in silence as she cleared her throat. 8 years ago, I woke up in a hospital with no memory of who I was," she began. "I didn't even know I had a son. I spent years in a rehabilitation center, piecing together a past that felt like a dream I couldn't reach." She turned to face Elliot. "When I finally remembered, I went looking for Noah, and I found him here, with you." Her voice broke slightly. "I never abandoned my son. I lost him, but now that I have him again, I won't walk away." David stood. "Miss Lawson, while we sympathize with your story, do you believe that disrupting Noah's current life and removing him from the only father figure he has ever known is in his best interest?" Amelia hesitated, her eyes flickering to Noah. "No," she admitted. "That's why I don't want to take him away from Elliot. But I do want to be in his life." Elliot's jaw tightened. So she wasn't here to take Noah completely. But was that something he could accept? Allison stood, a knowing glint in her eye. "Your Honor, we would like to call Sarah Chun, a former nurse at St. Helena Rehabilitation Center." A gray-haired woman stepped forward, her voice steady as she swore to tell the truth. "I worked at St. Helena 8 years ago when Amelia Lawson was admitted after her accident," Sarah said. She was confused, disoriented. But there was one thing she asked for, again and again, her baby. A collective hush fell over the room. Sarah's voice grew stronger. She didn't remember her own name, but she remembered her son. She would hum a lullaby to herself, over and over. "I thought it was just a comforting habit, but when I heard Noah humming that same tune, I knew it was no coincidence." Elliot's heart pounded. The pieces were falling into place. The lullaby, the missing child, the truth. The judge turned to Noah, her voice softer than before. "Noah, do you understand why we are here?" The boy nodded, clutching Rusty, his small knitted fox. "Can you tell us what you want?" Noah's small voice broke through the courtroom's heavy air. "I don't want to choose," he whispered. His gaze flickered between Elliot and Amelia. "I love them both. Can't we just be a family?" Tears pricked at Margaret's eyes. Elliot's grip on the table loosened. Allison seized the moment. "Your Honor, my client is not here to take Noah away from Mr. Hastings. She only asks for the chance to be his mother." The judge sat back, considering. Elliot's world tilted. For years, he had feared losing Noah. But maybe he didn't have to. The courtroom fell silent as the judge turned to face them. "This is a unique case," she said. "Noah Hastings has been raised by Mr. Hastings, who has provided him with financial and emotional stability. However, we cannot ignore the biological ties that connect him to Miss Lawson and Mrs. Lawson. She took a breath. It is clear that removing Noah from either party would cause undue harm. Therefore, I am granting joint custody. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Hastings will maintain legal guardianship, ensuring continuity in Noah's upbringing. However, Miss Lawson will be granted visitation rights and an active role in his life as his mother. A weight lifted from Amelia's chest. Noah grinned, looking between the two people who loved him most. The war was over, and somehow they had all won. The Hastings estate had never felt so still. Elliot stood by the window of his study, staring out into the sprawling garden where Noah sat with Amelia and Margaret. He could hear their faint laughter drifting through the open glass, laughter that both warmed and unsettled him. David Sterling's words from the courtroom echoed in his mind. Do you believe disrupting Noah's life is in his best interest? For years, Elliot had lived in fear of losing Noah. First, he had feared Noah would outgrow his need for him. Then, he had feared someone would take the boy away. But in all his fears, he had never considered what was best for Noah. He turned away from the window and adjusted his cuffs. It was time to face the truth. Stepping outside, he cleared his throat. Noah looked up, his green eyes bright. Mr. Hastings, come sit with us. Elliot hesitated, then approached. Amelia and Margaret fell silent as he joined them on the bench. He clasped his hands together, exhaling. I don't want to be an obstacle in Noah's life, he said carefully. If this is what makes him happy, then I need to accept it. Noah beamed. So that means you won't go away? Elliot felt something inside him soften. No, Noah, I'm not going anywhere. Amelia smiled at him for the first time since the trial. Thank you, Elliot, for everything. The small two-bedroom apartment Amelia had found wasn't much, but to her, it was a new beginning. The sunlight streamed through the windows as she set a framed photograph of Noah on the kitchen counter. Margaret stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. Feels good to have a place to call home again, she murmured. Noah sat at the table, doodling with colored pencils. Are you going to come visit me at the mansion too? Amelia chuckled. I think we'll be seeing each other plenty, sweetheart. A knock at the door startled them. Amelia opened it to find Elliot standing there, holding a set of keys. I know this place is small, he said, glancing around. If you ever need anything, a bigger place, financial help, just say the word. Amelia studied him for a long moment before shaking her head with a soft smile. We'll be okay, Elliot. But I appreciate it. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't say no to a better coffee maker, though. Elliot chuckled. I'll see what I can do. They weren't just coexisting. They were becoming a family. A week later, Noah burst into Elliot's study, waving a colorful flyer. My science fair is next week, he exclaimed. I've been working so hard on my project, and I really want you and Mom to be there. Elliot took the flyer, studying it. You sure you want me there? He asked carefully. Noah nodded, his expression earnest. You're still part of my family, Mr. Hastings. You always will be. Elliot swallowed the lump in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. We wouldn't miss it, he said. The school auditorium buzzed with energy as students displayed their projects. Amelia and Margaret stood near Noah's booth, admiring his experiment on plant growth. Look at how well you explained everything, Margaret said proudly. Elliot arrived moments later, glancing around awkwardly before catching Noah's excited wave. He walked up just as the judge approached. Impressive work, young man, the judge said. Great attention to detail. Noah grinned. Thanks. My whole family helped me. Elliot and Amelia exchanged a look. Neither of them corrected him. Because, in that moment, it was true. The dining room at Elliot's mansion had never felt so warm. Instead of its usual formal setting, the long table was filled with home-cooked food, laughter, and the sound of belonging. Margaret passed a basket of bread to Elliot. Not bad for a rich man's table, she teased. Elliot smirked. I had some help. Amelia smiled at Noah as he hummed a familiar tune, the lullaby that had brought them all together. Hey, Noah said suddenly, looking around. What if we made this a tradition? Every Sunday night, we all have dinner together. Elliot looked at Amelia. She nodded. Sounds perfect, she said. Elliot raised his glass. To new beginnings. Noah's small hand found his, then Amelia's, then Margaret's. They were no longer just individuals with fractured pasts. They were a family. Some bonds are never truly broken, no matter how much time or circumstance tries to erase them. The forgotten bond is a powerful reminder that love isn't just about who we are born to, but also about who stands by us, fights for us, and refuses to let us go. What would you do if you discovered that everything you thought you knew about your family was built on a lie? Would you fight for what you had or risk everything for the truth? Let us know in the comments. What would you have done in Elliot's place? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more compelling narratives that challenge the heart and mind, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We bring you the most gripping, emotional, and thought-provoking stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Don't miss the next one.